At my $1 million housewarming party, a home I built from scratch, my brother showed up uninvited, eyeing every room like he was appraising it. An hour later, my mother told me to pack my bags so his kids could move in. If you think family can't betray you, this story will change everything. And I promise by the end you'll see why sometimes the family that matters isn't the one you're born into, but the one you fight to create. The hum of conversation floated through the open windows of my newly renovated craftsman home in Portland, Oregon, where fairy lights twinkled against the early evening sky. It was supposed to be a perfect day, a day to celebrate everything I had built from scratch. At 32, I had finally stepped into a version of my life I used to only imagine, founder of a successful organic snack company, owner of a $1 million home, and for the first time in a long time, someone who felt steady. Friends mingled in the backyard, wine glasses in hand, admiring the reclaimed wood deck and hand-planted garden. Laughter spilled from the kitchen where my best friend and business partner Jake was showing off his homemade bruschetta. The scent of roasted vegetables wafted through the air. And yet as I stood in the entryway, a tightness settled in my chest like a premonition. Then the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my jeans, took a breath, and opened the door. Standing there, framed in the golden light of sunset, were my mother, Margaret, and my older brother, Brandon. Flanking them were Brandon's wife, Diane, and their 3 children, Ethan, Ava, and Lucas. "Wow," Margaret said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes scanned the foyer, lingering on the polished oak floor and the art pieces I'd carefully curated. "You've done well for yourself, Liam." Brandon gave a tight smile. "Nice place. Big." My mouth opened, then closed. I hadn't expected them. I had sent an invitation weeks ago out of formality, half hoping they wouldn't show. They hadn't RSVP'd, of course. But here they were. Diane offered a polite hug, her eyes weary but kind. The kids clung to her legs, wide-eyed and quiet. "Hey, Uncle Liam," Ethan mumbled. "Hey, bud, there's a game room upstairs," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Second door on the right. Go check it out." The kids disappeared with a kind of cautious excitement, leaving the adults in an uncomfortable silence. "I didn't think you were coming," I said, voice steady but cold. "Family should be together for big moments." Margaret replied, her tone saccharine. "Family." The word tasted bitter. As they stepped further into the house, the space around me felt smaller. This was supposed to be my safe place, my sanctuary after years of hustle and heartbreak. But with every step they took, it felt invaded. Their presence wasn't celebratory. It was evaluative, predatory, as if they were appraising the house not in admiration but in anticipation. Brandon ran a hand along the banister, his expression unreadable. "This place must have cost a fortune." "It did," I answered simply, not offering more. He exchanged a glance with Margaret that sent a chill through me, a look I knew too well from our childhood. A look that preceded decisions made without me at my expense. Margaret's gaze returned to me. "So what do you do again? Something with food, right?" I resisted the urge to laugh. She knew exactly what I did. She just didn't care to ask unless there was something in it for her. Jake appeared in the hallway, breaking the tension. "Hey, Liam, we need more wine glasses. You got any extras?" "Yeah, under the kitchen island," I said. As Jake disappeared, I turned to my mother and brother. "Help yourselves to food and drinks. I'll catch up with you in a bit." I needed air. I stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding. The image of them standing in my home felt surreal, like a dream bending toward nightmare. I had built this life brick by brick without their help, despite their sabotage. And now they were here, eyes gleaming with something I couldn't yet name but had felt before: expectation, entitlement, maybe even envy. For years they had made it clear I was the outsider, the afterthought. Brandon had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, and when he stumbled, Margaret twisted the world to catch him. I was expected to survive on scraps and gratitude, but now here I was, and here they were. I straightened my back and took one last breath of summer air before stepping back inside. Let the evening begin. The night air had calmed my nerves, but only slightly. As I re-entered the house, I couldn't help the flood of memories that crept in, old wounds surfacing in the corners of every room they walked through. Their arrival was a trigger, and not just of recent frustrations. It went much deeper. When I was 12, everything in our family shifted. My father, Robert, left after a dinner of meatloaf and quiet tension. No dramatic exits, no broken dishes, just a packed suitcase and a stiff hug goodbye. "Your mother and I aren't working out," he'd said. "It's complicated." But I had overheard enough late-night arguments to know what was really going on. Whispers about trust money and a woman from his office. I remembered one night vividly, Margaret screaming about how she had held the family together for years while Robert accused her of manipulating the boys. When he left, Brandon was 15, already being groomed as the man of the house. Margaret placed the weight of her bitterness and disappointment on me. Not directly, not at first, but through the little things. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" she'd say when I forgot to mow the lawn. "Brandon got a new bike for Christmas. I got a used one from a neighbor. When Brandon wanted to take guitar lessons, she found the money. When I wanted to join the school soccer team, she said cleats were too expensive. And when Brandon wrecked the family car at 17, Margaret blamed the rain. When I spilled juice on the carpet, I was careless and ungrateful. By the time I turned 15, I was bagging groceries after school and cleaning bathrooms at a local diner on weekends. Not because she asked me to, but because I knew there was no college fund waiting for me. Brandon, on the other hand, got into a music program at a community college and dropped out within a year. Still, Margaret praised him for trying something creative. Every time he failed, she softened. Every time I succeeded, she minimized. "You're strong, Liam. You don't need help," she'd say. "Not like Brandon." I internalized it, that my pain didn't count, that my needs were secondary. If Brandon was the sun, I was the shadow he cast. I learned to be quiet, to get by, to smile through gritted teeth. And yet I never stopped hoping. Hoping she'd see me. Hoping she'd choose me. It never came. What did come was a growing sense that home was not safe. Not emotionally, not financially, not spiritually. The people who were supposed to protect me were the ones who undermined me. Family wasn't comfort. It was a battlefield. But even so, I stayed through high school. I kept my grades high. I volunteered. I did everything I could to prove I was worth investing in. On my 18th birthday, while most kids were blowing out candles, I was watching my mother and Brandon hunched over the dining table with bank statements and calculators. They were quiet when I walked in. "What are you doing?" I asked. Brandon barely looked up. "Just figuring out a plan." Then I saw the papers, my savings account, the one Dad had set up before he left. $50,000, my safety net, my future. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't a plan that involved me. It was a plan that involved taking from me. That moment was the end of something, the last sliver of belief that maybe, just maybe, I mattered to them beyond my utility. And now, years later, they were in my house, eating my food, admiring my walls as if they were entitled to any of it. A voice from the hallway pulled me back to the present. "Uncle Liam, where's the bathroom?" Ava asked, peeking around the corner. "Down the hall to the left," I said, softening. She smiled, and I felt a pang of conflict. The kids were innocent. They didn't know what their parents had done, what their grandmother had allowed, but I knew, and I would never forget. I looked around the room full of laughter and light and reminded myself this was mine. Hard-earned, paid for in sleepless nights, double shifts, and sheer will. I wouldn't let them take this too. On my 18th birthday, I came home from my diner shift to find Margaret and Brandon at the kitchen table. Papers were spread out, bank statements, a laptop, a calculator. "What's going on?" I asked, dropping my bag. Neither of them looked up. "Just figuring out some options," Brandon said. Then I saw at my savings account statement, $50,000, the account Dad had set up for me when I was 5. I froze. "Why do you have that?" I asked, heart hammering. Margaret finally looked at me. "We need to talk, Liam." I sat slowly, bracing. "Brandon and Diane want to start a family business," she said. "A restaurant. They need capital, and you're in a unique position to help." My mouth went dry. "That money is mine. It's for college." "You have scholarships," she countered. "You'll be fine. Brandon has a wife, kids. He needs stability." "No," I said, voice shaking. "Absolutely not." Her expression hardened. "If you can't support your family, maybe it's time to leave. You're 18 now. An adult." I stood stunned. "You're kicking me out on my birthday." "No," she said, calm as ice. "I'm giving you a choice. Contribute to the family or go live your own life." The account was jointly owned. Legally, she could take the money. Ethically, it was theft. But there was no fight to win here. Not in that house. I went to my room, my mind numb, and stared at the walls. The walls that once felt like home now felt foreign. My fingers trembled as I packed. A few clothes, my laptop, a notebook. I stood in front of my childhood bed for a moment, the same one where I dreamed of a future that now seemed stolen. Outside, the January wind howled like it was trying to warn me. I hesitated at the front door, waiting for someone to stop me. No one did. Margaret didn't even look up. Brandon gave me a shrug, almost a smirk. I got into my car, a rusted-out Honda Civic I bought with tips, and drove aimlessly until I found a quiet street by the edge of town. I reclined the seat, pulled my hoodie over my head, and tried to sleep. It was the cold that kept me awake, not just the weather, but the kind that sets into your bones when you realize you're truly on your own. At 2 a.m., I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. The balance had already changed. 49,000 transferred, 1,000 left. My name was still on the account, but the money was gone. I stared at the screen until the battery died. I could have screamed. I could have driven back, demanded answers, shouted into the night, but I didn't. I had nothing left to say to them. That night I made a promise. I wouldn't just survive. I'd thrive. I would build a life so successful, so secure that they would never again have the power to take anything from me. And when I did, I would remember this exact night. The bitterness, the betrayal, the loneliness, it would fuel everything that came next. That night, I slept in my car, alone, on my birthday. But not broken, never broken. The days that followed were cold and unforgiving. My Civic became my home front seat for sleeping backseat for my clothes and belongings. I parked near a gym where I'd managed to get a discounted student membership, using the showers in the early mornings before heading to my barista job at Java Joe's. Mornings were spent steaming milk and wiping counters, afternoons running delivery shifts through a food app, evenings studying with borrowed textbooks under the yellow light of a university library corner. I said nothing to anyone. No complaints, no drama, just movement, just survival. The third week into my new life, I must have nodded off between classes at the campus library. I woke to a gentle tap on my shoulder and the concerned face of Professor Harris, my intro to business instructor. His eyes, always sharp, held something different that day, concern, curiosity. "Liam," he said quietly. You all right? I sat up fast, blinking. My neck ached from sleeping against the hardwood of the chair. Yeah, just tired. He didn't press, but the next morning he called me into his office after class. I expected a lecture about participation or grades. Instead, he closed the door and said, You don't have to explain, but if you need help, there are resources. That was the moment. That small flicker of kindness. I didn't sob. I didn't spill everything, but I didn't lie either. I don't have a place right now, I admitted. Things got bad at home. He nodded. There's a student housing program for emergencies, university-backed. Room in an older dorm for students who need transition space. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm. By nightfall, I had a twin bed in a dorm basement, a shared bathroom, a window that barely opened. But to me, it was everything. Professor Harris even dropped off a box of groceries and a blanket the next day. No judgment, just quiet generosity. That week, I applied for every grant scholarship and on-campus job I could find. I doubled down on freelance gigs too, designing flyers, writing copy for student startups, managing social media accounts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was income. Bit by bit, I stabilized. Tuition was partially covered by the scholarship I'd fought so hard for in high school. The rest I filled in with Pell Grants and work. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Classes kept me focused, especially business strategy and entrepreneurship. They felt like lifelines, puzzle pieces I could control. I devoured books on marketing, on growth hacking, on small business development. I started sketching ideas late into the night, business models, budget forecasts, customer personas. I was driven by more than ambition. I was driven by the memory of that night, the way Brandon looked at me like I owed him, the way Margaret turned my birthday into an eviction notice. But more than anything, I was driven by the quiet belief Professor Harris showed me. He didn't need to rescue me. He simply reminded me I was still worth betting on. That someone saw me not as a burden, but as a builder. Sometimes one person's belief can carry you through a storm. He was that person for me. The Civic stayed with me even after I moved into student housing, a reminder of where I started. But I no longer needed to sleep in it. That mattered. My world was still small. Classes, jobs, long nights of work. But it was building towards something. I felt it. Every paper turned and every shift completed, every exhausted hour stacked into the future I was clawing toward. And quietly I began to dream again. Not of revenge, not of proving anything to Brandon or Margaret, but of freedom, of building something unshakable, something no one could ever take from me again. The days that followed were cold and unforgiving. My Civic became my home front seat for sleeping back seat for my clothes and belongings. I parked near a gym where I'd managed to get a discounted student membership using the showers in the early mornings, before heading to my barista job at Java Joe's. Mornings were spent steaming milk and wiping counters, afternoons running delivery shifts through a food app, evenings studying with borrowed textbooks under the yellow light of a university library corner. It was a blur of exhaustion, hunger, and pride, the stubborn pride that kept me from calling anyone for help. Some nights were the hardest, rain beating on the windshield, my phone battery nearly dead, my stomach aching from instant noodles or nothing at all. I curled up in the back seat, wrapping my coat tight, whispering to myself that this was temporary, that I'd get through it, that I had to. 3 weeks into this life, I must have nodded off between classes at the campus library. I woke to a gentle tap on my shoulder and the concerned face of Professor Harris, my intro to business instructor. His eyes, always sharp, held something different that day. Concern, curiosity. "Liam," he said quietly, "you all right?" I sat up fast, blinking. My neck ached from sleeping against the hard wood of the chair. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't press. But the next morning he called me into his office after class. I expected a lecture about participation or grades. Instead, he closed the door and said, "You don't have to explain, but if you need help, there are resources." That was the moment, that small flicker of kindness. I didn't sob, I didn't spill everything, but I didn't lie either. "I don't have a place right now," I admitted. "Things got bad at home." He nodded. "There's a student housing program for emergencies, university-backed, room in an older dorm for students who need transition space. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm." By nightfall, I had a twin bed in a dorm basement, a shared bathroom, a window that barely opened. But to me, it was everything. Professor Harris even dropped off a box of groceries and a blanket the next day. No judgment, just quiet generosity. And that act, it cracked something open in me. A belief that not all adults failed you, that some quietly saved you. That week, I applied for every grant scholarship and on-campus job I could find. I doubled down on freelance gigs too, designing flyers, writing copy for student startups, managing social media accounts. I started helping a local bakery with their Instagram in exchange for bread and pastries. It wasn't glamorous, but it was income and calories. Bit by bit, I stabilized. Tuition was partially covered by the scholarship I'd fought so hard for in high school. The rest I filled in with Pell Grants and work. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Classes kept me focused, especially business strategy and entrepreneurship. They felt like lifelines, puzzle pieces I could control. I devoured books on marketing, on growth hacking, on small business development. I started sketching ideas late into the night, business models, budget forecasts, customer personas. Somewhere in that quiet, I found a sliver of hope. The Civic stayed with me even after I moved into student housing, a reminder of where I started. But I no longer needed to sleep in it. That mattered. I began tracking every cent I earned and spent, learning to cook cheap, healthy meals, watching YouTube tutorials on business pitching and public speaking. Professor Harris saw the change. He'd sometimes slide me books after class. "You might find this useful," he'd say, handing over titles on branding and negotiation. No sermons, just tools. I even began to make friends, not many, but real ones. People who didn't know my past, only saw my drive. One of them, Jamal, ran a podcast on student entrepreneurs. He invited me on one day, and I shared just enough of my story to hint at the fight with Mo, laying myself bare. The episode resonated. A few local business owners reached out. I picked up some marketing side gigs from it. The ripple effect of vulnerability. And quietly, I began to dream again. Not of revenge, not of proving anything to Brandon or Margaret, but of freedom, of building something unshakable. Something no one could ever take from me again. Sometimes one person's belief can carry you through a storm. Professor Harris was that person for me. He never asked for thanks, never made it about him. But I would remember him for the rest of my life. Because in a world that had shut its doors on me, he opened one. And that door led me back to myself. It was in my second year, over a lukewarm cafeteria lunch, that I met Jake Morrison. He was late to class, loud in conversation, and always scribbling odd ideas in the margins of his notebooks. We were paired for a group project in business strategy, an assignment we both initially rolled our eyes at. But it turned out we worked well together. Where I brought structure, Jake brought chaos, the good kind. His creativity paired with my discipline created something potent. One evening, while brainstorming in a cramped dorm room, he looked up from his notes and said, "You ever notice how healthy food always costs a fortune?" I laughed. "Tell me about it. Instant noodles have been my meal prep plan for a year." "That's the problem," he said, suddenly serious. "Organic food should be for everyone, not just yoga moms in the suburbs." That single line sparked something. We stayed up until 3 a.m. researching the organic snack industry, how most products were priced for upper-class consumers, despite the growing demand from working-class families, students, and health-conscious people with tighter budgets. And just like that, the idea for Rootwise was born. We envisioned a line of organic snacks, granola bars, dried fruit blends, trail mixes designed for regular people. Affordable, accessible, nutritious. We began testing recipes in Jake's off-campus apartment, using borrowed food processors and ingredients from discount bins. The kitchen was a mess of oats, honey, and hopeful dreams. Funding was non-existent, so we self-financed. I funneled my freelance income into ingredients and packaging prototypes. Jake sold his gaming console. We mocked up designs using Canva-printed stickers at the campus print shop and filled bags by hand. Then we hit the pavement. We went from store to store, small co-ops, corner delis, farmers markets, trying to get Rootwise on the shelves. Most store owners politely declined. A few laughed. "Organics for soccer moms," one grocer scoffed. "Your customers won't pay for this." We heard it so often it became a refrain. Organic wasn't for the masses, they said. We were foolish to think otherwise, but we weren't deterred. Every no felt like fuel. We turned to social media, posting our journey, the mess, the wins, the taste tests. Jake was a natural at video. His scrappy TikToks featuring taste test reactions and behind-the-scenes clips started gaining traction. One video, me accidentally spilling a vat of honey, went viral. Suddenly, Rootwise wasn't just a brand, it was a story. One people wanted to follow. Our orders trickled in, then grew. Local student groups, health clubs, even a food blogger who listed us on her top 10 startups to watch list. That blog post was the inflection point. We jumped from selling a few dozen units to fulfilling 300 orders in a week. We roped in friends to help assemble packages, working late nights from Jake's apartment surrounded by snack bags and Spotify playlists. Rootwise wasn't profitable yet, but it was real. And that made all the difference. People admired the hustle, not because we were flashy or instantly successful, but because we didn't quit. We shared our setbacks, the moldy batch of granola, the supplier who ghosted us, the rejected pitch at a local startup fair. It made Rootwise feel authentic, and authenticity bred loyalty. I started getting emails from students across the country who'd seen our story online. "You've inspired me to start my own thing," one girl wrote. I thought I had to wait until everything was perfect. That message stuck with me. Because perfection never came, but progress. That was something we made every day. And for the first time since that night I left my mother's house, I felt like I was building something no one could steal. Rootwise was mine. Ours. Born from grit, shaped by failure, fueled by belief. The world wasn't easy, but neither were we, and that mattered. By the time I turned 30, Rootwise had grown from our messy apartment kitchen into a nationally recognized brand. We had partnerships with mid-size grocery chains, a growing direct-to-consumer base, and had recently closed our first institutional investment round. Valuation 8 figures. That number still didn't feel real the day it was announced. 8 digits. Millions. Me, a kid who used to sleep in a rusted-out Civic. I didn't celebrate publicly. There were no flashy cars or champagne showers. What I did instead was quietly increase the budget for our community grant program. The one Jake and I started under Rootwise's name to support first-generation college students and student entrepreneurs. We called it the Table Fund because everyone deserved a seat at the table. No press releases, no announcements. Just students who received what I once needed most: belief, a second chance. A door opening. I never told my family. Not because I wanted revenge, but because some wounds weren't meant to be reopened. The Portland house came next. A craftsman built in the 1920s perched on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It had large windows, a garden in the back, and a porch that caught the golden light just right at dusk. It was the house I'd imagined 100 times during my darkest nights. Not grandiose, just mine, paid in full. On the day I moved in, I stood in the empty living room and looked around. No furniture, no noise, just me and the ghost of an 18-year-old boy who had once been thrown out of his home like garbage. I lit a candle. I whispered a promise to that boy. You made it. Over the next few months, life settled into a rhythm. I worked remotely. Jake handled more of the public-facing responsibilities. I found peace in the mundane, walking to the farmer's market, biking along the Willamette, volunteering anonymously at a youth shelter downtown. Then I got a text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, just thought you should know. Brandon's back living with your mom. Diane kicked him out. I stared at the message. Read it twice. Brandon, the golden child, the one whose needs always came first. Now back under Margaret's roof. No job. Rumors of gambling debt. A failed business he never told anyone about. The family restaurant he'd started closed, evicted. I didn't reply, but it lodged itself in my thoughts like a thorn. A few weeks later, I saw them. It was accidental, Margaret and Brandon walking out of a credit union near my neighborhood. They didn't see me, but I saw them. Brandon looked thinner. Margaret grayer. They were speaking quietly, urgently. She was carrying a stack of brochures. One slipped to the ground as they got into their car. I picked it up after they drove away. It was a pamphlet on real estate transfer processes. And that's when it clicked. They knew. Somehow they'd learned about the house, maybe from that same cousin, maybe from a neighbor. And now they were circling again like they had when I was 18, calculating what they could take. Except this time I was no longer that boy. The housewarming party was meant to be a celebration, a quiet milestone with friends, food, and laughter. I invited a few close colleagues, neighbors, and Jake, of course, who insisted we serve our original Rootwise snack mix alongside wine and local cheeses. The evening light spilled through the open windows, casting a golden warmth across the hardwood floors. Then uninvited Margaret and Brandon arrived. Margaret's arms were full of a store-bought pop. Brandon trailed behind with a stiff smile. I opened the door slowly, surprised but not entirely shocked. Thought we'd drop by. Margaret said cheerily, "Family should see how far you've come." I nodded cautiously, stepping aside. They mingled awkwardly, complimented the space, then drifted to the porch where guests were chatting. I kept an eye on them, unsettled, and for good reason. After most guests had gone, Margaret and Brandon sat across from me in the living room. Her pie had barely been touched. "This place is beautiful." She began sipping wine. "And so spacious. For one person." I said nothing. Brandon leaned forward. "Listen, Liam, things haven't been great for us. Diane and I, well, we're separated, and the kids, they need stability, a real home." Here it came. "You're doing so well," Margaret chimed in. "You don't need all this space. You're single, independent. We were thinking, maybe it's time to give back. Let your nieces and nephews grow up somewhere safe." My pulse tightened. "You want me to give you the house?" Margaret didn't flinch. "Not give, just relocate. You can afford another place. This could be a real home for the children." I stood up slowly. "You want me to leave my home so Brandon can play house again?" "After everything, you're being selfish," she said sharply. "You always have been. You think this house makes you better than family? This should be a place for love, not ego." I walked to the TV, picked up the remote, and turned on the screen. A slideshow began: bank records, emails, screenshots, transaction histories, all carefully compiled. Margaret's face paled. "These," I said, "are records of what happened when I was 18, the savings Dad left for me. Gone. Documents show the transfer, and Brandon's name on it all." The front door opened again. Jake stepped in, followed by a sharply dressed man. "This is Nathan," I said, "a lawyer. He's here as a witness." Brandon's bravado cracked. "What is this?" "Liam." Nathan opened a folder. "I have here a summary of financial coercion, identity misuse, and fraudulent signatures. Everything prepped in case of litigation." Just then, Diane walked in. Jake had invited her without telling me. She stood at the threshold, eyes scanning the room. "What's going on?" she asked. I looked her in the eye. "You didn't know, did you, about the account? About the money they took?" Her eyes widened. She turned to Brandon. "Tell me that's not true." Brandon stammered, but the silence told the story. "I wanted this to end quietly," I said. "But this house, this life, I built it from nothing, and I won't let you take anything else." Margaret's voice shook. "You're turning your back on your own blood." "No," I said firm. "I'm drawing a line. For the first time." And with that, I opened the front door. "Please leave." They did, one by one. Diane last silent, her world unraveling. I stood alone in the quiet, my heart racing, but also steady. I hadn't just defended my home, I reclaimed my story. In the days following the confrontation, my phone didn't stop ringing. Margaret called at first with practiced concern. "We didn't mean it that way." "Liam," but her voice turned sharp the moment I didn't fold. Then came Brandon's messages, alternating between guilt-tripping and anger. "You owe us for everything we sacrificed," he texted once. I blocked them both. But the emotional noise lingered. Like a ghost tethered to memory, the voices haunted my quietest moments. At night, I would wake with a start, heart racing as if waiting for someone to barge in and demand something again. I found myself snapping at Jake over minor things, forgotten chores, late replies. I lost focus during meetings. Even in moments of quiet, my brain raced. The house that once brought me peace now held echoes of judgment and tension. That was when I realized this wasn't over, not really. I needed help. Not the bootstrap kind, the real kind. Dr. Morales was gentle with a quiet strength that didn't ask me to explain everything at once. We started slow talking about boundaries, about learned patterns of guilt and manipulation. Sessions with her became a lifeline. I unpacked years of shame and misplaced responsibility. "You were conditioned to believe love comes with a cost," she said once. "Your healing begins when you learn that real love doesn't demand your silence or your suffering." That sentence lived in me, echoed through my thoughts like a mantra. The work was slow. I journaled every morning, practiced breath work. I confronted feelings I had shoved deep into mental boxes labeled too much. I mourned the family I never had, the birthday dinners that didn't happen, the hugs I longed for but never received. I learned that forgiveness wasn't about erasure. It wasn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It was choosing peace without requiring an apology, choosing to release them, not welcome them. Meanwhile, Diane filed for divorce. It didn't make the news, but it reached my ears through mutual acquaintances. A few weeks later, she called. We met for coffee one afternoon at her request. She looked exhausted but lighter somehow. "I should have seen it sooner," she admitted, "but I was so desperate to believe Brandon could change." She asked if I'd consider helping with the kids' education. "Not for me," she added quickly. "For them. Ethan's talking about college already. Ava wants to be a vet. Lucas, he's still figuring it out." I thought about it, about what those kids meant. how they too were victims of choices they never made. I remembered their small hands, their innocent eyes at the housewarming party. The way Lucas had clung to my dog as if seeking comfort from the chaos. "I'll help," I said, "but not by handing over money. I'll set up a trust, independent, protected." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you. You're giving them what they never had a real chance." Over the next year, something unexpected happened. The kids began to visit. At first it was awkward. Short visits, quiet dinners. Lucas would sit silently, eyes darting around, unsure if this was another house with unspoken rules. But they warmed up. Lucas loved my dog Rosie. Ava helped me in the garden planting her favorite tulips. Ethan asked about marketing internships and watched documentaries I recommended. They didn't come because they had to. They came because they wanted to. They started calling me Uncle Liam again, not as an obligation, but as something real. A title reborn, not from bloodlines, but from choice, and slowly we built a new kind of family. One that wasn't perfect, one that didn't have a Christmas card sheen, but it was honest, respectful, safe. The house that had once been a fortress became something warmer, filled with laughter again, game nights, birthdays, even a messy Thanksgiving where we burned the turkey and ordered pizza instead. The kind of imperfect joy I used to think belonged to other people. I kept going to therapy, kept working, kept building. Dr. Morales taught me that boundaries weren't walls to keep love out, but gates to let the right kind of love in. I began speaking at youth centers, sharing my story not as a warning, but as a testament to resilience, to the power of chosen family. One rainy afternoon, Ava asked me why I didn't speak to Grandma anymore. I looked her in the eyes. Because sometimes to stay healthy, we have to walk away from people who hurt us, even if they share our blood. She nodded. "I think I understand." Dad wasn't nice to Mom either, and in that moment I realized the ripple was already happening. Healing wasn't just for me, it was for the next generation. The cycle could end here. One day during a walk through the neighborhood, I realized I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was living, not for revenge, not in fear, but in peace. And that more than any house, any success, that was the victory I'd always longed for. It happened on a gray, unremarkable Tuesday. I had just returned from a speaking engagement at a youth shelter when I saw the envelope tucked into my mailbox, no stamp, just my name scrawled in a handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Robert, my father. Inside was a short note. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't polished. It was human. "Liam, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know I was wrong. Not just in leaving, but in staying silent. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. I'll be at Powell's Cafe this Friday. Noon." Dad. I stared at the letter for a long time. My hands trembled slightly. Not with fear or anger, but with a heaviness I couldn't yet name. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in years. He had become a ghost in my life story, both villain and void. But I showed up. He was older, of course. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His frame slightly hunched, but his eyes, those hazel eyes I saw in the mirror every morning, were the same. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We ordered coffee. The conversation was halting, awkward at first. He apologized not in grand declarations, but in details. He explained why he left, how overwhelmed and powerless he had felt, how Margaret's control extended further than I had ever known, how he had tried to stay connected but been cut out, threatened with legal action if he interfered. "I was weak," he admitted, "and you paid for it. I didn't absolve him, but I listened." He didn't ask for anything, just a chance to try. And maybe that's what made it possible. We started meeting once a week, sometimes over coffee, sometimes just walking the park near my home. He asked questions not about work or success, but about me, my dreams, my fears, the things I never got to say as a kid. I learned he'd remarried, divorced, and moved back to Oregon after retirement. He lived in a modest apartment near the river. There was no redemption arc, no big gesture, just quiet consistency. One Sunday, I invited him over for dinner. The kids were there. Ethan helped grill burgers. Ava set the table. Lucas taught him how to play Mario Kart. It was simple. Beautifully, wonderfully simple. Later, as we washed dishes side by side, Robert glanced at me and said, "Thank you for letting me be here." I looked at him, seeing not the man who left, but the one who was showing up now. It's not about missing things, he said. We don't have to carry its weight forever. Dr. Morales often said healing doesn't always come with closure, it comes with acceptance. I couldn't rewrite my childhood, but I could choose how it shaped me. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't for him, it was for me. It was stepping out of the shadow into peace. That night, after everyone left and the house fell quiet, I sat by the window staring at the moonlit garden. The pain didn't vanish, but it didn't define me anymore. And in that stillness, I whispered to the boy I once was. The one who felt forgotten, abandoned, unwanted, we made it. We are safe now. A few months after that dinner, I received another unexpected knock. It was Brandon. He stood at my porch in worn jeans and a nervous posture I had never seen on him before. Not cocky, not aggressive, just stripped of pride. "I'm in therapy now," he began, eyes lowered. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did, I wanted to say I'm sorry, for real this time." I said nothing at first, just watched him stand there like a man balancing on the edge of change. He continued, voice raw. "I've lost a lot, and I know I deserve that, but the kids, they still talk about you, about how kind you've been. I'm trying to be better even if it's late. If you'd let me visit, just to see them, I won't ask for more." I considered his words for a long moment. The boundary I had worked so hard to build loomed large in my mind. I didn't want to invite chaos back in, but I also saw a man trying, perhaps for the first time, to confront his shadow. "I'll allow it," I said finally. "You can see them. But here, with me present, and only if they want to. There are no second chances with me anymore, only earned trust." He nodded slowly. "That's more than I deserve." "You're right," I said. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for them. And for me. Because I need to let go of the weight, not because you've earned it." He left quietly. That was enough. Weeks passed. Then months. Life settled into a kind of joy I had once thought impossible. The house buzzed with weekend visits, new recipes, and laughter that sounded like healing. And then came my 33rd birthday. Jake arrived first, arms full of party snacks and an old Rootwise apron he insisted I wear. Professor Harris followed with a first edition business strategy book and a grin. The kids, Ethan, Ava, Lucas, had handmade cards and a chocolate cake they had baked and nearly burned. My father brought a plant for the garden, something resilient, he said. Even Diane stopped by briefly with a shy smile and a hug that felt sincere. We filled the backyard with stories and sunlight. We toasted not to success but to survival, to choosing love when pain had every excuse to win. As the last guests filtered out and twilight settled over the porch, I poured myself a glass of wine and pulled out my journal. The same one I had started during therapy. I wrote, "I no longer fear losing my home. Because I've finally built a place that can't be taken. A home made not of bricks but of trust. A family not by blood but by choice. I looked around, at the lanterns glowing softly above, at the table still cluttered with plates and laughter. And for the first time in my life I believed it. Home, real, true, mine.